See my screen? Hi, I'm Amelia, and I wanted to talk today about notifications. So I recently joined the Foundations team and have been digging into the notification when to do experience within GitLab. I've only been on the team for about a month, so it's still early days, but I wanted to share some of the things we've learned as we've been investigating, as well as a few early thoughts on how we might consider updating the current experience in response to the things we've heard from people so far. First, a little bit of context, why talk about notifications now? Over the coming year, Foundations will be investigating improvements to the notification and to-do features in GitLab. And while there have been many improvements to the features over the years and many additional suggestions for further improvements to them, there's also the feeling that the current experience for both features could do with some extra love and attention. With literal years of feedback at this point, though, for how to improve these features, where do we start and how do we begin? Well, we've started by talking to people both inside and outside of GitLab. Over the past month, we've been working to better understand how people are using notifications and to-dos. Jeff, our PM, and Taina, our UX researcher, recently spearheaded a problem validation study. Jeff's also been digging into product usage data for to-dos on GitLab.com. And the goal for these efforts is to better understand the challenges people have with staying up to date with work happening in GitLab, how they think about notifications versus to-dos, and how people are currently engaging with the to-dos feature. Jeff recorded a really great walkthrough of this research, and I recommend you check it out for the full story. But I wanted to share some of the key insights from this study today, and I'll finish by walking through some of the ideas we've been discussing for addressing some of these opportunity areas within the product. So first, the research results. The big three takeaways from the research are: our opinionated to-do system pushes people out of GitLab in favor of email inboxes. People want to receive more notifications within GitLab and have more control over them. And as a result, to-do adoption and retention is low. So some of these results, I'm sure, will seem surprising to people within GitLab. For instance, that people want to receive more notifications. But yeah, that is something we heard from people both inside and outside of the company. Since there's no way for people to see notifications within GitLab currently, many people, especially those outside of GitLab, are relying on their email inboxes to keep track of what's happening in their GitLab projects. Also interesting to discover is that outside of GitLab, to-dos aren't really used at all, in part because we discovered so much information isn't captured in to-dos currently. So we'll dig into some of the insights that support these findings. Something we heard again and again in interviews was that people are missing important information when they only use to-dos. Why? To-dos are currently sort of masquerading as notifications in the product, and they're doing so in a way that's not comprehensive enough to serve people's needs. For example, GitLab does not create a to-do when someone replies to your comment, only when your @ mentioned. And people, especially outside of GitLab, are often unaware of this behavior and reply to a comment without @ mentioning the author. And as a result, people are missing replies to their comments if they only rely on to-dos. And this pushes people, especially those using the product outside of the company, to abandon to-dos in favor of email notifications. So something else that repeatedly came up during interviews, not only are people missing information, if they rely on to-dos, they're afraid of what they might be missing. This is especially true for people who are responsible for leading teams like PMs and development leads. That's part of why they're abandoning to-dos and just turning on email notifications for everything. It's that they don't miss anything important. We heard things during interviews like, "I'm afraid I could miss something." I turn on email notifications for every single project and then go through my email on a regular basis, once or twice a day. This is interesting to me because it's not necessarily how people within GitLab use the product. And people within GitLab do rely on to-dos, and we've trained ourselves to @mention people to accommodate that behavior. I'm sure you've noticed that in people's status messages. Maybe it's even your own status message, @mention me, I only use to-dos. But that's not necessarily how people outside the company are using the product. They need to keep a close eye of what's going on, and currently there's no good way to keep track of that within the product. So they instead need to enable email notifications for everything and rely on frequent email inbox triaging to make sure they aren't missing anything that they need to action. So this next insight is also interesting to me. Right now, we've decided at a product level what should generate a to-do and what shouldn't. Well, people can decide to create a to-do on a particular issue or MR. They can't fine-tune what appears on their to-do list by default. Also, only a very limited number of items generate a to-do at present. This leaves people with a to-do list that may or may not include all of their actionable items and generally also contains updates that aren't necessarily actionable, like you assigned yourself an issue. So instead, people are manually going through their email notifications, triaging that list, and deciding what needs to be actioned. And then they create their own action list from those items, which they use instead of to-dos. What we heard from people, I read my email notifications, and then I write tasks down. Or I rely on emails and filtering and create to-dos for myself within the email system so that I can come back to it. So for all of these reasons, then to-do adoption is quite low. That finding is also backed up by product usage data. Jeff discovered that if we exclude internal GitLab accounts, only 3% of active users are visiting the to-do page each week. Also, fewer than 6% are returning to the to-do page after their first visit. And for me, that seems like a pretty huge finding. Most people outside of GitLab aren't using to-dos because they're failing to meet their needs. And we know that's true, not only because that's what they're telling us, but we're seeing that in the data as well, that people are abandoning the feature after they try it out. So one final, less surprising insight, notification emails are noisy. We all know that. It's why many people within GitLab have abandoned notifications in favor of to-dos. Well, people can modify how many notifications, email notifications they receive and for what. It doesn't seem like that's really addressed the issue, perhaps in part because the notification settings page is pretty hard to find and use right now at present. But we heard the following during interviews. You get a lot of emails, and I'm just saying it can get a bit overwhelming. I get most notifications and I delete a lot that I just don't need, or you get a lot of noise from emails because you get flooded by notifications for every person that leaves a comment. Importantly, though, even with this noise problem that I think we all have experienced, people are still opting to get the available notifications just so they don't have to worry that they're missing something. But that means they're currently just submitting to the noise and occasionally using things like email filters to help them manage it. So what do we do here? A participant during our research study said the following: if I could have the same kind of notification within GitLab as his email notifications, that would be perfect. If there is a notification about a ticket, you stay in the same environment. No need to switch from one tool to another. And going through past sus comments, similar things have been said many times by many people. To-do usage is poor because it's not meeting the needs of our user base. Further, people want to be able to stay up to date reliably within GitLab. But how will we do this? We started sketching out a few ideas for how we might address the problems that have been identified within the product, and I'll share a few of those now. But before sharing the wireframes, I wanted to flag that these are very early ideations based on what we've heard in our research over the past few weeks, and nothing set in stone, and we're still thinking about how best to proceed. Also, none of the UI choices you'll see in these wireframes are decisions at this point. When you see menus or drawers or modals, that's all just meant to illustrate a possible approach for addressing the problems. However, we'll keep investigating what is the right UI element as we continue to develop these designs. So as a quick reminder, our research indicated that people are missing updates when they use to-dos, which leaves them relying on email notifications that they then have to triage in a separate tool to decide what items need actioning. How might we address these problems? I started by thinking what would happen if. For example, what would happen if we gave people the option to move notifications out of emails and into the UI so people didn't need to rely on their inboxes to see what was happening in GitLab? This list could either replace or supplement the existing to-do list. In what you're seeing here, it's supplementing it, but not replacing it. If we brought notifications into the UI, we then give people the opportunity to get more information about a notification in context, so they don't have to open up a separate product to get additional information. Could we then allow them to take a number of actions on notifications directly from within GitLab? So I've listed out mark as read, unread, create a follow-up, snooze, or archive as possibilities. Probably unsubscribe would be a good one as well. But these are just a few initial ideas, and we could also enable bulk actions to more quickly clear out this list. Finally, if we start bringing notifications into the UI, could we consider grouping them more sensibly so that all like content and conversations are threaded appropriately? So these are the sorts of changes we're considering that feel like they could potentially help address some of the problem areas that we've identified in the research. Though, of course, before moving forward with any of them, we validate that they actually do with additional research. And the other key piece of feedback is about the current limitations in terms of being able to fine-tune what shows up as a notification or a to-do. And with that, I wondered what would happen if we made it easier to find and access the notification settings from the UI list. So here we're just surfacing the link to the settings page directly within the notifications list. Then, what if we simplified what's presented on the settings page so that it's more easily digestible? What would happen if we allowed people to decide which channel they wanted to receive their notifications in their email inboxes or in the UI? Further, right now people have no control from a settings point of view over what appears in the to-do list by default, but what if they did? And finally, what if we updated the custom notification settings to better align with people's needs, so that they only receive notifications for those things they wanted to receive notifications for and nothing else? So those are the kinds of changes that seem like they might start addressing some of the noise problems that we've identified. So that was a really quick run through of some of the initial ideas in response to what we've learned during our research. And as you can see, they're very early sketches and much more work would need to be done before we move forward with anything you see here today. But if you're interested in clicking through a full wireframe walkthrough of all the ideas so far, you can review the full set of wireframes using the link in the slide. And you're very welcome to leave thoughts on that linked issue or in the linked Figma file. And at this point, there's 4 questions that we'd love feedback on. First, is there anything important that you wanted to see present in these wireframes that isn't? Second, are any of these improvements more exciting or necessary to you than others? 3, is there anything that seems especially problematic or worrying about what's been described? And finally, are there things you worry we haven't thought about that we should? So with all of that in mind, what are our next steps? So we are going to continue ideating on both shorter and longer term designs. We're going to do more research, solution validation of whatever ideas we come up with, certainly, but also continuing to better understand people's needs as we ideate on UI changes. Pinning down an MVC that starts on the path towards better supporting people's needs and workflows, and continuing to gather feedback on the wires. We're very aware as we do this work that everyone uses to-dos and notifications in very different and often very specific ways. So we want to engage with people and ultimately work towards building a system that's as flexible as possible to accommodate these different ways of working. But the way we get there will probably involve changing people's workflows So we want to do that as carefully and as mindfully as possible. And we do very much welcome thoughts, comments on the link to wireframes and the issue. With that, just want to say thanks for listening. If we have some extra time, does anyone have questions? I can try to answer.
I have just a very minor one. I just wanted to say thank you so much for the presentation, and I'm so happy that this is getting looked at. And I also really commend you and the team for the research-backed approach, because we have a lot of bias about the way that we use to-dos, and I think it's probably not the standard. So I love that you highlighted that. Something that I've thought about that I would love to see, and I think you touched on it a little bit in your wires with the grouping, is if the notifications could be intelligently sorted. As a user, this is my own bias, but I'm coming into this view and I have like 30 things to do. And I'm actually like, well, which one is actually important? Which one is time sensitive? Like, if we could start to look at those different like levers we could pull and surface like, hey, you really need to pay attention to this. And when you get a chance, you might want to look at this. That would be amazing. But I totally understand there's some really table stakes stuff that needs to be, this is like a future refinement, but I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Some way of sorting priority and yeah, things that are time sensitive, I think that'd be a great improvement as well. And whether that's in notifications or if the future version of to-dos too, so that people can rank those by priority, I think those would be great improvements. And yeah, I feel like what you pointed out, the way we use to-dos and notifications and things and how people outside of the company, that keeps coming up again and again. And it's because we use them so differently than it seems like everybody else does, that it feels a little tricky to make a recommendation that's going to work for both groups. But that's kind of one of the things that we're trying to figure out how to do best. And it looks like Emily.
Yeah, I have the next question. I'm curious, like, and maybe it's a little early for this question, but how do you see sort of notifications and to-dos coexisting over time, or I guess not coexisting with only 3% usage? I'm curious if we're considering deprecating them in favor of like more robust notifications.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the big questions. It seems pretty clear that they're not really super useful right now, and whether or not we want to invest in making them useful, I think is going to have to be a decision that we make at some point. I think that so what we found in the research is that people do go through and like triage their notification lists and create action items. So whether we want them to be able to do that in the product or not, I think that's what to-dos could become in the future, that it could become that action list that people are creating. I think I just called the tab stuff I want to follow up on, because I don't know if we still want to call them to-dos in the future. Maybe we don't, I'm not sure. But I think there is a way that we could evolve those to-dos to become the actionable items list that people are generating for themselves as they triage the notifications. So I think there is space for both of them to coexist. We need to differentiate the purpose for both, and I think give people more control over what's becoming a to-do, and allow them to create their own in a more meaningful way. And I don't know, I think Jeff's on the call too. So Jeff, if you have other thoughts, you've been thinking about this a lot longer than I have, so please feel free to dive into.
Jeff, we can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now? Okay, rookie
Yes.
mistakes. But no, Amelia covered it very, very well. I think the only thing I would add is just getting engineering input on which approach makes the most sense, right? If we know that to-dos aren't quite cutting it, does it make sense to turn them into something that's more effective, or does it make more sense to burn that down and build something fresh from scratch? So I think the approach that we take to iterating will depend on kind of how we can make the most impact in the shortest amount of time.
Looks like Pedro's is read-only. Vitika, do you want to vocalize your question?
Yeah, sure. I was not able to type fast enough. I really appreciate you making a mention of that users mostly want to know, like, what are the things that they should be following up on or they should act upon. And one thing that I've noticed from the pipeline execution side is those action items, they cannot always be captured as to-do items or notifications, because sometimes it's up to the user to decide based on the role and responsibility that they have in a team.
Right.
So for pipelines, one thing that we have noticed is they always make a mention of having some sort of a dashboard. And I can tell you, like, overall in Verify, we have been trying a lot to have like this one place where they can just come in the morning, understand what are the things that need their attention. So yeah, I think the future page is going to, if that's the job that we are targeting, allowing users to see what are the things that would need their attention, that they need to follow up on, that would need an action from them, it would look very different, because then we'll keep in consideration all these nuances that their roles and responsibilities add to the situation.
Yeah, those are really good points. And I mean, your point about having sort of a dashboard to review everything that's happening, I think that's come up as in a bunch of different groups for
Yeah,
different
that's
reasons
what-
and stuff. It does feel like that's missing right now. And it kind of sounds like what you're talking about is that somebody would review that dashboard and create almost like a personal action item. Is that kind of what you mean? Like they would see that this
Yes.
pipeline failed or something, and they need to go contact some person or whatever they need to do that they want
Right.
to. Okay. Yeah, I think being able to, I think one thing with our to-dos right now, you're just kind of adding a to-do blindly, but you're not saying what it's for, writing any reminders or comments, and there's like
Right.
just one per issue, but having more control over being able to leave context or maybe like even a deadline, like follow up by this time or date, or priority or something like that. I think adding that kind of functionality to the to-dos could be really powerful.
Right. So just an idea that for some it may look like, I don't know, this is like a long shot, but sort of adding a widget to just see what's the performance of a specific kind of pipeline in a project, or for someone who's tracking vulnerabilities, it would just be to see what are the high level or critical vulnerabilities that were captured in the previous scans and following up on that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that could be really, really powerful. Thanks for flagging that roles thing too. I think that's something important as we're thinking about creating automatic to-dos or, updating that behavior, thinking about roles is going to be really important. So yeah, thanks for flagging that.
Thanks for working on this.
Yeah. Looks like that's all the questions are in. Go ahead.
Sorry, one question from me. I'm not gonna be able to type fast enough in order to get them in there in time. I'm really interested in the concept of a notification and whether or not there has been thought around system notifications. So for instance, you run out of compute minutes, you run out of seats, because in our UI, we leverage banners so much, and I think there could be an opportunity to declutter the UI and to allow those notifications to live in a more livable space, which could be notifications.
I agree. I think there was an issue or something recently that Austin was looped into and looped me into. It was the same sort of idea that, yeah, right now we use banners for all of these things, but could we just use notifications instead and clean up the UI in that way? I think that could be a really good improvement too.
Awesome. I'm excited. Thank you so much for all the work on this.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I can echo Amelia's comment there. Like in the short term, we're looking at making it very usable, something that end users really want to love. Because right now, if we put system notices in there, no one would see them. So we need to drive adoption before we can really start doing that sort of work. But that is on or at least on my list of things to explore once we get adoption up.
It looks like Jeremy, you're typing something. I don't know if you want to vocalize or if it's for read only.
This is awesome. Obviously from my comments, I'm kind of a target audience for for this, so I will be happy to guinea pig anything. So, but Tim's comment sparked another thought. Was as I've worked on components, like getting into just messaging components, like the category of messaging, and how we're very alert heavy, and we're very like that type of a notification, those instances, even bringing in some of those concepts into notifications, like, I'm notified when something fails on a page, or real-time notifications where, yeah, Figma's kind of like that. Figma's got kind of the catch-all where it's like, you were pinged for this review. Oh, and by the way, you're running against this, usage count, or so-and-so is requesting access. It has all of those folded into one. And so anyway, yes, thanks for mentioning that, Tim, because that triggered that as well for me with like just the regular alerts and other toasts and things like that we use to communicate things, even notifications for feature updates or releases, or your expired access tokens, like things like this, that could all be helpful in one place.
Completely agreed. Yeah, I think having all of those things in one place instead of in various banners and emails and all of that, I think that could really improve. It could clean up the UI and improve the experience for people pretty dramatically. I know. Oh, Nick, sounds like you have
I just had one last question that I thought about here of like, so we have group mentions today, which are just go out to everybody, but they're all like disconnected. So I don't know if that's something you're planning to look at. It probably wouldn't have to be MVC, but there seems like there's an interesting opportunity there to do something a little bit different around like a team working on the same thing and what that looks like.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We haven't been talking about that at all much. I don't know, Jeff, have you thought much about that yet, or this is something that we need to look at more?
No, I certainly haven't been thinking about that. One thing y'all may have caught that we haven't really announced it, but you'll see soon, is that we're actually renaming the foundations group to personal productivity. So a lot of the focus is not on how does my organization operate or how does my team operate. It's how do I, as a person that is working across 17 projects, and this one has pipelines and this one has merge requests and this has issues, how do I wrangle all of that into something that I can use as a really streamlined way for getting through GitLab on a day-to-day basis? So the team view of that may not be in scope for this group. But I know a team that works on team level things that may be interested in that idea.
I'm glad that you flagged that because I haven't been thinking about that much at all yet. So I'm glad that you brought that up so I can keep that in mind as well. I think
looks like we've reached the end of the agenda. Thanks so much, Amelia, for presenting and for all the great questions. Bye, everybody.